The first thing is the Mozart excerpt, probably the hardest thing that you'll have to deal with on this audition. I want to just say a few things. Just make sure that it sparkles and that it dances. That's one of the elements of the style. Keep in mind the very, very good suggestion that NMEA has. Do not play it any faster than you can play it cleanly. So they give a suggestion of half note between 65 and 75 beats per minute. That's not mandatory. That's a target. Find a tempo for you that works for you and make it dance and make it sparkle. Okay? I use my own tempo, but it doesn't mean that you have to use the same tempo also. Okay, let's get started on it. Let's first talk about the tempo. I recommend 72 beats per minute. That's only because it's halfway in between the recommended beats per minute of 65 to 75. So I will reiterate what NMEA suggests. Do not pick a tempo that is faster than you are capable of playing. So slow and clean is better than fast and sloppy. So I'm going to do it at 72 because it's somewhere in the middle between 65 and 75 when I perform it for you. Okay, let's first talk about the opening statement. One of the things that I tell my students at UNO is first impressions and last impressions are very important. So you always have to get your excerpts off to a good start. There's absolutely nothing wrong with playing this open D to yourself quietly. I don't know if you can hear it. Just stroking it like that. And then finding the D there. If you want to use a closed fingering, I suggest using first finger on the A string. Just tapping the D there, just to get started, so you're coming off to a good start. Put your bow on the string, wiggle it a little bit, but don't play it. Wiggle it as if you're about to play it, and that way you get off to a good start. Notice I put a little bit of a space in between the low D and the high D. Yes, do that. Put a little bit of space in there, but not too much. Going on to the end of that second measure of your excerpt, you have 16th note D. What do you do with that? What a hint that I can give you is to make that D 16th note and think of it as belonging to the downbeat of the following measure. So it actually belongs to that C sharp. That will make you think about that D belonging to the C sharp and keep you from playing it too slow. So that's a really good hint because a lot of people play that 16th note too long and too slow. So think of it as belonging, and then every 16th note that you see after that, same thing. So here's a little bit. Notice I did the same thing to the two 16th notes, the A and the B. I made those 16ths belong to the downbeat of the A in measure 17. I know it sounds really tedious, but to simplify it, anytime you see a 16th note followed by a long beat or a long note, think of that short 16th note belonging to that long beat. It'll make things sound more logical. Okay, going on. You probably are wondering about the stroke. Let me talk about that a little bit. Let me jump to measure 29 of the excerpt. I suggest short sounding, off the string sounding, but not actually off the string. I don't know if that makes any sense. I know it sounds kind of antithetical, but I want you to think short, think off, but don't actually play off the string. Oftentimes we hear the word off the string and then people start doing that. That's really not the sound that you want on the bass. So I just want you to think about sound off, sound short, but don't actually force your bow to leave the string. One thing that's going to help is rosin. Make sure you're using a good kind of rosin. I use white oft, wheat oft, however you say it, but Carlson, Nyman, Pops, some types of Kolstein rosin, the softer kinds. Use one of the ones I just mentioned. If you're using something other than the ones that I've mentioned, you're just not going to get as good of an off-the-string sound, and it's really important to get the good kind of rosin. So make sure you invest in a little bit of good rosin. It makes all the difference. And the only reason I'm smiling is I'm quoting a famous bass player, Henry Portnoy, who would always tell his students to invest in rosin. He would always say it sarcastically, but really there's a lot of truth to it. Get some good rosin. It'll make a lot of difference on this excerpt. Okay. So now that we've talked about the stroke, a few things. I want you to go to measure 19. Notice those two rests. I'm a real stickler for counting rests. You know why? Because I used to listen to the NMEA bass auditions, and one of the things that students did on their audition tapes over and over and over again was they wouldn't count the full durations of their rests. So please count in your head. So if I start in measure 18, 2, 3. Okay, just count in your head. And then that F sharp, make sure that you're not rushing that quarter note on beat 4. It's really weird that I'm obsessing about 2 quarter rests and then followed by 1 quarter note. But really it makes all the difference when you pay attention to those details, counting the rests. Moving on to measure 23. You've got quarter note on the downbeat, a D, and then you have 3 rests. Then you have the fun part, measure 24 and measure 25. And you might think this is the bread and butter of the excerpt. Really it isn't. I don't want you to obsess too much about it. One thing that'll help you is to play that first B in measure 24 short, like that. And what that helps you do is that it helps you launch the rest of the excerpt. If you play it too long, it's hard to get articulation on the following note after the B, and then that's what makes it hard to play. So if you just play a short B, same thing on measure 25, short A, it'll make those 16th notes much easier to play. And you'll hear that when I actually play the excerpt, when you hear me play the excerpt. Next little pointer I can give you, if you jump to measure 27 of the excerpt, you're going to see this forte piano. Now fingering, there are different ways to finger this. I have fingerings that are attached to this video. You can look at them if you want and use them. I'm going to let you decide which kind of fingering you're going to use there. I'm not going to recommend any one fingering, and you don't need to copy me. The forte piano, what the heck do you do with that? My suggestion is to think of the entire measure of measure 27 as a subito piano measure. It's all piano compared to all of the other measures around it. But then there's an accent on the B in beat 1 and an accent on the B in large beat 2, if you're counting half notes as a beat. So when you do that, it keeps it in the piano dynamic. If you think coming at it from the other way, where you think of it as a forte coming down to a piano, it ends up being too loud. So please just think of it as a piano measure, measure 27. And then in measure 28, after you play measure 27, play that loud. Well, don't overplay it like I just did, but play it loud so it makes the previous piano sound even more like a piano because of the contrast of the loudness that comes in measure 28. Okay. Measure 33. Count those measures. Count those beats. Please count the beats. And then finally, measure 34, we get to the next part of the excerpt. The hint that I can give to you is in quarter note, if you're counting quarter notes as your primary beat, in beat 3 and beat 4, if you play the E natural short and you play the C sharp short, kind of like this, it kind of clears the air and makes the other notes around it cleaner. So I want you to try that. I don't actually do that myself, but it might be something for you that you might like. Also, thinking of it that way helps you clear the air for measure 35. Measure 35 needs to come down to a piano. And if you play those notes short, the landing note short, it's much easier to come down to a piano. Okay? Yeah, it's got to be that soft. All right. Let's skip on down to measure 59. Measure 59. Okay. So, one thing that I want to point out, measure 62, right at the end of measure 62, the very, very last eighth note, go ahead and circle it now. It's G sharp, not a G natural. One of the tendencies is for people to play that very last G sharp as a G natural, even though they play G sharp in beat 1. So watch out for that. Don't be that person that plays a G sharp. Okay. Another hint I can give you, in measure 63 and measure 64, put an accent on the D and put an accent on the C sharp. So let me exaggerate a little bit by backing up one measure before. It kind of gives a little bit of a phrase to it. Some people don't like it, but it's something that I do. I'm going to go ahead and recommend it to all of you just because it tends to clear up the line and forces you to make it cleaner sounding, and everyone wants a cleaner sounding Mozart line. Okay, so to end this, the very last thing I can say about the Mozart is, remember what I said earlier about first impressions and last impressions? End really nicely on the low A. You don't have to vibrate it. But you do need to let it ring, but without being too long. Okay? So, that's all I have to say about the Mozart. Refer back to my performance, and good luck on this one.